Chapter 21, in which the danger gets worse. Squinting through the window's grating, I tried to catch a glimpse of the door. Part of my head fit in between the bars, and I saw an old screwdriver wrenched into the door, locking it tightly. "Try shake the door a little bit," I called out to Kai. He did try, but neither the screwdriver nor the door budged even a single inch. It had gotten stuck quite well. I tried snaking an arm through the bars, but I couldn't reach the screwdriver. "Do you think we can find a stick somewhere in here?" I asked, and heard the sound of Kai and Louise rummaging through the porcelain. The severity of our situation had went completely over Bubblegum's head, because he kept repeating "stick, stick" with a bemused smile on his face. There was a lot of crunching as Kai and Louise stepped on a lot of porcelain. It had been 10 minutes or so, and Kai finally said, "Here's a piece of wire." I turned back to face the inside of the hovel, and Kai handed me a thick piece of wire, quite a bit rusty, and twisted but useful. I made a small island, went back to the window. I could actually reach the screwdriver this time, and would have only needed a minute or so before I could have loosened the wedge or even completely removed the screwdriver altogether. Unfortunately, Bubblegum had gotten quite a little bored with only standing around next to us. He decided to tickle his older sister to alleviate the boredom, and pushed his index finger right into the very ticklish back of my knee. I was so surprised I lost my grip on the piece of wire, and it fell onto the grassy floor outside. Over a meter outside my arm's reach. "Bubblegum!" I screeched, mad with disappointment. Now it was his turn to be surprised, and he almost started crying. I quickly hugged him, because a crying, screaming Bubblegum was the absolute last thing we needed right now. Kai, in the meantime, tried his luck with his own methods. He read out the window's grating, but as brittle as the small hovel looked, at least its grating seemed to be incredibly stable. He kicked the individual wood planks off the door, but they seemed to be just as stable as the metal bars blocking the window. I put Bubblegum back onto the floor and looked around the inside of the hovel. It was actually built against the bare rock of the mountain behind us. A roughly worked expanse of blank stone made up the entire back wall. There was an old table and a half-rotten chair. Everything else was broken porcelain and 2 grated windows. Every single wall, aside from the mountain one of course, looked old, but nowhere near as brittle enough to break, and the roof wasn't even made of singular roof tiles that we could have moved aside, but of tightly fastened cement fiberboards that I couldn't imagine would be easy or even possible to move. "Well," I said, and felt a lot less brave or even optimistic as I was trying to project, "it looks like we're trapped in here for the moment. Who knows, maybe another kid comes by and helps us out." "I doubt that," Louisa whispered fearfully. "Those teenagers put a warning sign back at the beginning of the playground. No one's going to come down here." It's not like the sign's going to be there forever," I said without believing my own words. "Anyway," sighed Kai, "we actually do have all the time in the world to search the porcelain shards for a pot with an elephant motif now." There wasn't anything else for us to do, so we started looking through the shards covering the entire floor of the hovel. It was a lot easier than I'd imagined. Most of it was blank white porcelain. We found the occasional whole plate or saucer, but there wasn't a single cup or coffee pot that didn't have at least a missing handle. Sometimes the porcelain had the flowery pattern or ornamental vines, golden or blue. Those appeared to be the popular colors for decorating old-timey porcelain. We didn't find a single illustration of an animal, not to speak of an entire elephant. Though, it seemed the teenagers hadn't been the one to break Mr. Clumpman's door. Who knew, maybe they'd stolen a cup and saucers from our grandmothers, but definitely not from the local porcelain store that didn't even sell porcelain. Our investigation had reached a new low, and I was quite certain we could bin the plan of trying to take the teenagers' fingerprints. We'd actually started sweating by now. Where it had been pleasantly warm on the outside, the air inside of the hovel had turned humid and stifling with time. We took off the light jackets we'd put on, and then our pullovers too, until we were only wearing our t-shirts. Louise, who stood nearest to the wall, turned around to take another look at the heap of shards, and suddenly let out a sharp squeak. "What happened, Louise?" I asked immediately, and ran over to her. "Look here!" she cried. "There's something inside the wall and cut my arm." I looked at the wall first and noticed a large glass splinter that Sir Mervyn had shoved into the wedge between 2 stones. I turned to Louise. A long tear went down her arm. It didn't seem very deep, but it had already started bleeding profusely. Early March really wasn't the time to walk around in your undershirt, but I didn't care and took off my t-shirt. I used the glass shard on the wall to cut a t-shirt into stripes, the way I had seen it in a child-friendly crime thriller on TV once, and wrapped them around Louise's arm. Some of the blood kept seeping through the cloth despite my best efforts. "It would be good if we had some water to clean the scraped fur," said Kai, who'd only watched as I bandaged Louise's arm. It looked almost as pale as Louise herself. "This is so cool, though," he spoke out words of genuine respect, a rarity with him. "You have to teach me some of those first aid skills one day. They seem to be quite useful." "We have water," announced Bubblegum suddenly, and seemed utterly delighted at the fact. We looked at each other in confusion, because we didn't understand what he was even referring to, and Harry glanced out the window and nearly felt it at our feet. At long last the Michtel had finally started overflowing, and had already flooded large parts of the lowest level of the playgrounds. Water streamed into the hovel from under the door crack. The general water level rose quickly. "Onto the table," I said, and was sick and tired with the sheer amount of today's adventures. All my adventure books keep telling me that the character experiencing the adventure didn't actually enjoy them, and had never understood why. I think I did now that I was stuck in the middle of an adventure myself, and really just wanted to go home. Reading a book, there was always an option of closing it once things stopped being fun. That option didn't exist in the real world, and all we could do was keep going. We didn't even have a book that we could have closed.